Ransomware is certainly a major buzzword going around in the cybersecurity industry right now. And for companies to actually have advice as to what to do when they see a news headline or an article that states something about a ransomware attack is to really get to know and understand the fundamentals behind a ransomware attack, and then position them and their staff into a spot where they can run through mock scenarios, right? We call them tabletop exercises, to where if they theoretically were to become victim to a ransomware attack, they would immediately know what to do or have a playbook to resort towards, to then refer to and have individuals immediately start acting to either countermeasure that attack or make decisions based off of what that situation presents to them. What really concerns me the most is that we keep seeing it, and it's become more of a reoccurring theme within cybersecurity. It's working, which is why it's seen in the news so often, right? So it concerns me that individuals are not getting the proper training that they should be to now avoid this, because ransomware, even though it is such a big buzzword and we see it so often, it is actually easily avoidable if you have the proper training and resources involved within your environment to then give the tools to your employees and to your staff members to then avoid it altogether. So as we continue to see it more and more, it just concerns me that we're not currently doing the right things to stop it immediately. Every situation is a little different and comes with their own parameters behind it. So to just have a cookie cutter answer of if you should pay the ransom or not is really difficult to decide, right? So if you want to adhere to major industries and three-letter agencies like the FBI will tell you no, right? And I kind of stand by what the FBI entails of not paying a ransom, because as we continue to see it more and more, it is working, and this is profitable for attack and threat actor groups to become actually, get money in return and have a profitable reward by doing a ransomware attack. So I would like to say no, do not pay the ransom, because it'll eventually stop and dwindle away, and then attackers will then find something else that might be profitable. But right now it's ransomware, and it's going to continue to be ransomware if organizations continue to pay the ransom. But in regards to what's ethical, I'd say, of course, ransomware is not ethical to begin with. But I don't think paying the ransom has to do much with ethics in general. It just has to do with how you want to protect and position your network, right? So the ethical approach would be not to adhere to the ransom or whatever it may be, the demands of the attacker, right? But again, every situation is different depending on how critical the information may be that is being held ransom, or whatever your financial situation is within your organization. But I would like to say that there is a cookie cutter approach. It's just hard to really have that definitive standpoint. Yeah, it certainly is criminal intent, and there are some organizations and individuals that have been held accountable, but you're right, absolutely not many organizations have been held accountable, and it's difficult to tie that to a single person or a threat group, right? We hear about what's going on in the news with our adversaries of the United States and what kind of malicious intent they have behind potential phishing campaigns, social engineering campaigns, ransomware campaigns. And even if we were to conduct the proper threat intelligence to be able to kind of definitively say, like, yeah, this is who we believe is conducting this attack, it is almost impossible to prove it. And that's why it's difficult to then hold these organizations and threat groups accountable, because even if we have a very significant reason to believe that this organization, this individual may be conducting that attack, it is almost impossible to prove it, right? You always hear the good old quote, it's not what you know, it's how you can prove it, right? So it's difficult to be able to tie that specifically to an organization or an individual. And cybersecurity is just so new still. We don't really necessarily know how to handle these situations. So more laws, regulations, and advisories coming out now. More agencies are being stood up to help combat that. But over time, I think we're going to continue to see more and more accountability for sure. How to position yourself against ransomware really begins by being proactive instead of reactive, right? So in my situation, I would like to know before I even get attacked or presented with a ransomware situation, on what to do, right? And it starts with training and education and awareness, but then it also goes into the actual countermeasures and technical implications that you have on your network, right? You want to be able to segment your network to where if an attacker were to theoretically get into your network through a phishing campaign that would then lead to potential ransomware, to be able to position your network in a sense to where they may only have access to a limited amount of information. So if you're dealing with classified information, to be able to segment that into a different area of your network to where if an attacker may get in, they have to go through several different obstacles to get to that segment to get even more sensitive information. So really getting to segment your network in areas to where you know it's kind of siloed in a sense of what to do if this segment is hit with a ransomware attack and vice versa down the line. But also being able to actually have backups, right? You want to be able to have offline backups and backups in real time to where if maybe your entire network does theoretically get breached, you actually have the information that the hacker is holding ransom, right? So then you can restore from your offline backups and almost act as if nothing ever happened by patching the whatever exploit happened for that attacker to actually gain initial access. So a lot of things come involved with how to deal with it. It starts with training, education. You also need to segment your network and then having proper backups. But again, being able to disseminate that plan to your organization so everybody is on the same page when that situation does theoretically arise. I definitely like to hear more about that as well, because there's actually attacks now that disguise themselves as ransomware attacks, but they may be doing something else in the background, right? They may be actually deleting your data entirely, but because they have access to a network, they can present a dialogue that states, hey, we now have your information. It's being held encrypted at ransom, pay us X amount of money. But just because that message is being received does not necessarily mean that's exactly what's happening. So if that ever does happen, organizations need to be able to look into what is actually happening on their network, because there are attacks that disguise themselves to look like ransomware. But also encryption is difficult to crack, right? We have encryptions nowadays that theoretically will never be decrypted whatsoever. So if an organization does encrypt your information and you are actually suffering from a real ransomware attack, the encryption algorithms behind what your information is being encrypted with are almost impossible unless we have quantum computing capabilities to decrypt that information. So the technical aspect of things does not exist. And that's kind of why attackers are getting away with this, right? Organizations cannot access their data. It's lost unless we kind of already talked about having offline backups or positioning themselves in a segmented way to be able to deal with this. It's very difficult, and it will continue to be more difficult as attackers begin to really refine their ransomware attacks. So through my training and certification of becoming a certified ethical hacker, you learn the fundamental knowledge of what ransomware is and to really understand how to combat it, right? To be able to provide the proper training from day one. That is by far the biggest takeaway, and majority of ransomware cases start from a phishing attempt where a user happens to click on a link and an attacker gains credentials or gains some kind of initial access to the network. And it really begins by informing employees and your users and your staff members of what to do and what not to do. And especially if they come into a situation that may present itself as phishing attempt or ransomware, to be able to alert the proper individuals. And that begins by understanding the fundamental knowledge of what ransomware is and how the attacks are conducted to combat it, by going through and becoming either CEH certified or just doing your own due diligence and training, reading about how these attacks are actually conducted.